Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
This is Todd DeHoop, and welcome to the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazer, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at Honda's iconic ATC200X. Now, this was Honda's first attempt at a high-performance four-stroke three-wheeler. The 250R had come out 2 years before this, but it was a two-stroke machine, certainly more high-performance than the 200X was. But this was really kind of a great do-it-all, sporty ATC for the common person. It wasn't a full-on race machine, certainly a little more milder state of tune than a 250R. A little more limited suspension, softer suspension overall. But these were really, really popular ATCs, really during the heyday of the ATCs here in the early 80s. Within a few years, Honda would unfortunately have to get rid of the ATCs. There'd be a lot of pressure from the government and customer advocacy groups saying that the ATCs were unsafe, and eventually they would retire them to history. But here from 83 to 87, the ATC200X was one of the most popular machines in Honda's lineup, and they sold a ton of these bikes, or trikes, I should say. They were small, little, easy-to-manage machines. As I said, it's a pretty mild state of tune. I think on paper it put out a little over 10 horsepower in stock condition, which is certainly not going to yank your arms out of your sockets, but it was powerful enough to be fun, good for popping wheelies and riding around trails and stuff. It was nice enough that somebody inexperienced could get on it, hopefully not kill themselves. ATCs in general were a little dicey. I always had trouble not crashing the darn things. My brother had a 350X, which was the bigger brother to this machine, and I almost killed myself every time I was on it. But I was always much more comfortable on four-wheelers. But I know there are people who love the three-wheelers, and this is certainly one of the most iconic and popular ATCs that Honda ever built. Now, if you like this sort of thing, if you want to check out some of the other videos I've done other retrospectives on ATVs, including the bigger brother, the 350X, which was only built in 85 and 86, and all kinds of other motorcycle retrospectives, including looks back at various XRs, CRs, KXs, several motocross reviews, and off-road reviews. I'm kind of agnostic on that. I've had many motocross machines, many off-road machines, many ATVs, and I love them all. You just have to keep in mind what they're intended for and not expect too much out of them, and you can have a good time on them. If you like to support what I do, I have Motocross Vault merch available. I have several designs, including a 250R, 4Tracks design, some other ATVs, and some ATCs as well. If you'd like to check them out, I have hoodies, t-shirts, and stickers and what have you available in my Teespring store. I'll put a link here in the description and also in the video as well if you'd like to check out some of my merchandise. So here, without further ado, is a look back at Honda's iconic ATC200X. In 1983, Honda introduced the very first four-stroke ATC with full suspension, the ATC200X. Now, this machine is revolutionary in several respects. It uses an engine derived from the XR200 of the time, which was certainly not a powerhouse. I think in stock condition they rated this machine at about a little over 10 horsepower. But when you compare it to the other machines available at the time, it really was a quite revolutionary three-wheeler. This is the first machine, as I said, to offer full suspension front and rear in the four-stroke class. You have large air-assisted front forks, which put out 7.3 inches of travel. You have a single shock in the back, which put out a fairly modest 6.7 inches of travel. Again, this is not groundbreaking in terms of motocross standards, but for three-wheelers at the time, this was big news. At the time, most three-wheelers in the four-stroke, in fact, all three-wheelers in the four-stroke class were more work-oriented. Even the ATC200, which had been used by many people to actually race. They took these 185s and 200s and turned them into race bikes with custom chassis, but they were never really designed for this. The stock ATC 185 and 200 used a auto-clutch pull-start engine, which was very low power, but people modified them heavily and turned them into race bikes. But this ATC200X is really from the factory, ready to go. It's more of a trail bike. It was never really designed to be a full-on race machine, but it offered a much better foundation to start from if you were looking to actually race one of these machines. Now, this motor is a kickstart, doesn't use a pull start, has a manual clutch, a close ratio 5-speed transmission. Again, it's based loosely on the motor found in the XR200. It is a 2-valve engine, putting out 192 cc's. Certainly not a powerhouse, as I said, but you could get pretty substantial horsepower out of these. I know Powerroll and some other companies were really hopping these things up and turning them into little four-stroke fire breathers. This first ATC200X is a handsome machine, in my opinion. Really good-looking bike. Honda touted that they designed the tank and the wind tunnel in order to get more cooling air to the heads. Has little ram scoops on it. Almost looks like it has radiators. You have a headlight on the vehicle, so you could certainly ride it at night. As I said, the long travel suspension is pretty low tech for the time. It's not anything that you would have found on a CR or anything, but compared to zero suspension, which you would have found on, at least in the rear, on like the Yamaha Tri-Motos or even like a 200S or something at the time, huge improvement. In 1981, Honda introduced the first high-performance ATC in the form of the 250R two-stroke. That was based loosely again on a CR250R motor, certainly higher performance than this. But here in 83, you have a total redesign of the 250R and the all-new 200X. They feature a much narrower front tire with a taller profile to give better steering response. Made a big difference in terms of the steering precision on these machines. And this machine is actually a little bit lighter than the 250R. At 282 pounds, it actually weighs less than the two-stroke version, which is pretty surprising. This motor is, again, not a powerhouse, but very reliable, easy to ride. Great beginner machines, and these 200Xs, man, they flew off the shelves. People love these things. They turned out to be a huge hit for Honda here in 1983. Again, if you're looking to race it, you're probably going to want to upgrade the suspension. The suspension's soft. It's good for trail riding. There's no linkage in the back. It doesn't have the Pro Link like the two-stroke model does. It's just a simple single shock with the remote reservoir, nothing fancy. But for the time, and when you consider it's a machine of one in its class, it was a very impressive first effort here for Honda in 1983. Here for 1984, Honda stuck to mainly minor updates here on the ATC200X. It turned out to be a huge sales success in 83, and they really didn't need to do a whole lot, I don't think, to keep the ball rolling here in 84, but they did add a few things to improve reliability and durability. First thing, probably the most major thing, is an all-new rear swing arm. They went from a kind of a round tube design to a box section design here. Not as advanced as what you would have found on the 250R, but it is a little stronger here for 1984. Visually, that's probably the only major difference between these two machines. If you look at them at first glance, it's almost impossible to tell the two apart. The color scheme stayed the same. Really, there is a subtle difference in the 200X graphic on the side, but other than that, the 83 and 84 look almost exactly the same. Mechanically speaking, you get a beefed up Kickstarter assembly here for 1984. You get new damping in the rear shock. They adjusted the compression and rebound damping rates to improve performance. Still only a rebound adjustable. I think they're 4-position rebound adjustable settings. And lastly, they added a redesigned skid plate here for 1984. Other than that, the two machines are identical. Still a 5-speed manual clutch kickstart 4-stroke, putting out a very mild delivery of power. Great machine overall, but not much different than 1983. For 1985, Honda updated the appearance of the 200X a fair amount. This is, I think, by far the best looking of the first-gen designs. This is the first year where they went to the red, white, and blue look, which I just love. The blue seat versus the black one, I think, is an improvement, visually speaking at least. They also went to a blue spring for the rear shock. But really the only differences between the 84 and 85 are visual. It is a good-looking three-wheeler in my opinion. Like I said, I think this red, white, and blue is probably the best color scheme the first-gen came in. A lot of people think this is the best looking of all the 200Xs overall. Good-looking machine, I think. In many ways here in 1985, this is kind of the pinnacle of Honda's ATC dominance. This is really when the transition just started. The quad racers introduced here in 1985, and that really kind of changes the paradigm in terms of ATVs overall. But this is a really, really important year for Honda's ATC lineup in that they get an all-new 250R this year. This is the first year for the liquid-cooled, what would be the last and best generation of the 250R. You also get a bigger brother to the 200X in the form of the all-new 350X ATC, a really awesome-looking machine. I remember when this three-wheeler came out in 1985, man, I wanted one so bad. I thought it was so cool. A few years later, my stepbrother ended up getting one, and after riding it, probably not that impressive, but I know to my 15-year-old self, man, I wanted one so bad. I thought it was so cool. Here in terms of the 200X and 85, this is the last year for the first-gen design. It gets no major updates in terms of mechanical stuff, but it does have an update in terms of the graphics and overall look. It basically adopts the same look as the 350X. Other than visually, it's exactly the same machine it was in 83 and 84. Well, actually 84, because 84 did get a few updates. It is certainly one of the best looking ATCs of its era. This is the outgoing design. Like I said, they weren't going to spend a lot of, they had already sunk a lot of money into the all-new 250R and 350X this year. So unfortunately, the 200X just got a bold new graphic update here in 1985. For 1986, we get the first major redesign of the 200X platform. This is a complete redesign from the ground up. Literally everything is new on the 86 model. And for my money, at least, this is the best looking of all the 200X models. I love the design of this. It's a good looking color scheme. I think the 250R is probably still maybe a little better looking, but overall, I think this is, my favorite of the four-stroke ATCs that Honda ever built, in terms of appearance, at least here in 86. You get a switch to white fenders, from the red the previous couple of years. You also have an all-new tank, all-new front fender. Little ram scoops are designed to get air to the motor. The engine is all new here in 1986 as well. It gets a bump up in displacement to 199 cc's. It is an all-new engine design. It's still a pretty low-tech motor. Certainly by modern standards. It's air-cooled, 2-valve per cylinder. They did add the availability for external valve adjustment here in 1986, makes it a little easier to maintain it. Primary kickstarting, as with the previous ones, there is a built-in compression release to make kickstarting easy. The transmission is upgraded this year from a 5-speed to a 6-speed transmission, make it a little more versatile. The engine itself is still no massive powerhouse. If you've ever rode one of these, it's a pleasant motor, plenty of power. These are, again, not designed, primarily as race bikes, although certainly plenty of people race them. And this engine, at least initially, wasn't, appreciably more powerful than the old one, but I think overall it's a little more modern design. The suspension is upgraded here in 1986 as well. In the rear, it goes from 6.7 inches of travel to a 7.2 inches of travel. Still a single shock, nothing fancy though. That has 4-way adjustable rebound damping, no compression damping adjustability. Up front, the forks are upgraded as well. They go from 7.3 inches of travel in 1985 to 7.6 inches of travel here in 1986. They're still very simple forks, damper rod, no external adjustability aside from air pressure. So, they're not anything like you would have found on a CR at the time. But for the machine's intended use, if you're not going to race it, it certainly was pleasant enough. It's more tuned for trail riding than big jumps. If you were to try and take one of these on a motocross course with a stock suspension, it's going to bottom out pretty badly front and rear. But they're fine for plunking around trail riding. Again, what most people would have done with the 200X. The frame is all new this year. They went to a box section frame. There is a change in geometry as well. The rake was reduced 1 degree and the trailer was reduced 5 millimeters to improve steering precision. It still uses a narrow front tire instead of the more balloony style that the old ATCs used. Overall styling, like I said, is very clean this year. You have the ATC on the seat and the 200X on the fenders again. This is probably my favorite of all of them in terms of the overall look. I love the red, white, and blue. New logo here for 86. They had them on the CRs as well, and I always thought that was my favorite of that combination in terms of appearance. This was a pretty solid upgrade, I think, in most ways. The seat height's a little lower here as well for 1986, again, to improve handling. The rear tires are of a lower profile as well to improve turning. Obviously, that's hugely important on an ATC. They're kind of tippy by nature, so you want to have the lowest profile tires. You don't want to have a lot of roll in the back. And keeping the seat height low also helps keep the machine's center of gravity low and make it a little better handling. I think most people will consider this to be a solid update for the ATC200X. Unfortunately, however, the days of the ATCs were coming to a close pretty quickly. You had the four-wheelers coming on strongly, and plus getting a lot of pressure from the government. So this would be the last major redesign the ATC200X would see. For 1987, we get the last year of the ATC200X. As I said earlier, ATCs in general were coming under a great deal of pressure from the media, the federal government. A lot of people thought they were just unsafe by nature. And the four-wheelers had really kind of started to take over by this point. You had Honda introducing their own 4-Trax 250R in 1986. Of course, the Quad Racer was out, and here in 87 you had Kawasaki coming out with the Takati 4 as well. So the move was clearly towards four-wheelers. And this is the last quote-unquote high-performance ATC in the Honda lineup. Here in 1987, they had discontinued the 350X and the 250R. They'd moved all the way to a two-stroke 250 quad in the performance category. And really, Honda didn't ever come out with anything kind of to take the place of the 350X. The 250X, which 87 four-wheeler I had, actually. I love this bike. It was a great, or I guess I love this quad. It was a great machine, but didn't have the torque of the 350X, so that kind of was like a sad machine to see go. Here in 87, you get very modest updates to the 200X. As I said, they kind of saw the writing on the wall. It's kind of interesting that they did keep this one in the lineup here this year. You get a new keyed ignition, which is really the main difference here in 87. Apparently these dash pads with the keyed ignitions are just the holy grail if you have one of these things. They're hard to come by these days, but you did get that here in the 87 200X. The overall graphics, I think, are not as attractive in my opinion. I think the machine looked better with the Honda wing on it, on the tank, and the red shrouds. I don't really care for this 87 graphic particularly, and the lack of having the ATC or 200X or anything on the seat I don't think is as good looking as the year before, but I mean that's splitting hairs. Really, mechanically speaking, there really isn't much difference. They upgraded the rims here slightly for 1987. They changed the engine guard to be more protective, and of course added the key and the padded steering cover and the graphics. Other than that, it's exactly the same machine it was in 1986, and this would be the last high-performance three-wheeler Honda would ever produce. As I said, they discontinued the 250R and the 350X here in 87. I did see, some promotional materials where they showed a 250R and a 350X, I think for the Canadian market, but from what I can tell, I don't think those machines ever were actually released. If you know better, if you ever seen one in the wild or something, let me know. But I don't think those machines ever actually made it to production. I think this 200X was the only one that actually saw the light of the day in 87. Like I said, the machines were coming under a lot of pressure at this point, and I think Honda thought it was best just to transition to four-wheelers and get out of the fire of all the people, the consumer reports, and everything else that were giving them so much grief at the time. These machines, they weren't only out for a few years, but I think people really still love them to this day. The 200X in particular was a fun machine. It's, powerful enough to be fun, but not so powerful it's going to get away from it. The 350X, like I said, my brother had one of those, and that thing was kind of a handful. It was that compression braking. If you rolled off the throttle suddenly mid-turn, boy, it would really upset the chassis, and you could turn that thing over pretty quick. It was a kind of a handful of a machine, in spite of not being super powerful. This 200X was a little easier to manage, and I think a great all-around machine. Like I said, I had the 250X. Four-wheeler and a 300EX, a couple of those later, which were kind of the spiritual success for this machine. And I think that's just a great overall size bike. Not too big, not too small, and peppy enough to be fun, but not intimidating. So there you have it. That's a look back at the history of Honda's ATC200X, a machine that was only in their lineup for 4 years, 83 to 87. Very short amount of time when you consider how influential it is, how people still fondly remember them, collect them. Certainly a machine that probably has an outsized position in terms of the history of off-road machines in relation to how short its run was in terms of an actual product for the masses there. This is Honda's first four-stroke sporty ATC, certainly much more sporty than a 200S or a 250SX or any of the other machines, the Big Red and whatever they were producing at the time. Not a rocket ship by any means, but a super fun little ATC as long as you kept in mind its limitations. These three-wheelers, they could bite you if you didn't know what you were doing. I've certainly have crashed three-wheelers so many times. My brother was always big into these darn things, and every time I get on them, darn near I'd crash it. But I always thought they looked cool from a distance. I think I appreciated them more looking at them than actually riding them, because they always like to bite me. But super fun if you know what you're doing. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. If you like to support what I do, there is Motocross Vault much available, and I'll put a link here in the video if you'd like to check that out. Until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.